Hi, my name is Laurel Cates, and I am a patient advocate. I have a master's degree in health advocacy from Sarah Lawrence College, and I wanted to talk tonight about patients' rights. In hospitals, we see posted the Patient Bill of Rights. A right is something that you are entitled to, that it is consistent with law, and to which you have an enforceable claim. The Patient Bill of Rights is based on the concepts of autonomy and self-determination. It is your body, and you have a right to decide what you want a medical provider to do or not to do with your body. All hospitals post these rights, but patients do not fully understand them, and hospital personnel often do not fully follow them. And it is up to you to know these rights and then to ask that they be followed. I've just put up the rights. I also have passed out to each of you a copy of the Patient Bill of Rights. Okay, the first one is to understand and use these rights. If you don't understand the rights, hospitals are obliged to have someone available who can answer your questions. Interpreters must be available who can speak your language. Sometimes there's not an interpreter physically available, but hospitals have access through video to contact an organization that will have translators, and it is your right to understand these rights, and if you most understand them most clearly in your own language, you have a right to have those explained to you in your language. You also have a right to receive treatment without discrimination. This includes race, religion, color, sex, national origin, disability, sexual orientation, type of insurance, and age. All patients, regardless of insurance status and regardless of any of the other things I just mentioned, must receive the same level of care, and modifications must be made if necessary. Some years ago, I'd walked into a room and there was a hearing impaired patient there, and he had a device that he had to turn on in order to be able to hear me. And I waited while he put that on, and then he said to me, "You're the first person who's walked into this room who has waited for me to put on that device, and I really appreciate that." So it's your right to have any modifications made that you need in order to be able to speak with anybody who comes into your room, with any of your providers. You have a right to receive considerate and respectful care. The environment must be clean and safe. If there's anything in your room that you think is not clean and safe, it's your right to get someone into the room to clean it for you. No unnecessary restraints should be used, and this includes people with mental health issues. All healthcare providers and staff should speak to you with respect, and they also should use something called teach back to be sure you understand what is being explained. So if they explain something to you, you can say, "I want to repeat back to you what I understood," because what they said may not be the same thing that you understand. And that you also have a right to have your calls for assistance be answered. And we all know that sometimes in hospitals it takes a while when you push that button for someone to come in. You have a right to receive emergency medical care if you need it. There was an act passed initially in 1986, and then it was revised some years later, called the Emergency Medical Treatment in Active Labor Act, or EMTALA for short. This mandates that all public and private hospitals must treat all patients with an emergency situation. Under EMTALA, a hospital must provide patients with a medical screening. So the medical screening determines whether or not an emergency actually exists. If an emergency is found, the hospital must stabilize the medical condition of the patient, and there can be no delays in screening or care to check about insurance status. In the past, patients were often transferred to other hospitals because their insurance was checked and they didn't have insurance, and the hospitals didn't want to treat patients, and they were transferred. And this law mandates that all patients must be treated and stabilized. If the medical condition cannot be stabilized, the patient may be transferred to another hospital. However, this can only happen under certain conditions. Number one, if the treating physician states in writing that the benefits of being transferred outweigh the risks. So if the hospital does not have the facilities, equipment, or know-how to treat a certain patient, a doctor can sign in writing that the patient needs to be transferred. Another condition is that the receiving hospital has to have space and staff to treat the patient. And then if the transportation must be made in appropriate the transfer, must be made in appropriate transportation. So this might even include life support equipment if necessary. So it has to be a safe mode of transportation. While in the emergency department, a person whom you choose as an advocate has a legal right to stay with you at all times. Okay, the next right is actually self-explanatory, have a no smoking room. Years ago this was an issue, today this is no longer an issue. You have a right to know the names and functions of all staff working with you. The most important doctor who you should know about in the hospital is your attending physician. This is the doctor who is in charge of your care. You may see lots of specialists, you may see residents and interns and medical students, but the attending physician is in charge of your care. You also have the right to know the names, positions, and functions of anyone involved in your case, such as specialists, nurses and nurses' aides, medical students, interns or residents, and therapists such as physical, occupational, speech, and respiratory. You have a right to receive complete information about your diagnosis, treatment, and prognosis. The purpose of all tests, treatments, and drugs must be explained to you. And again, teach-back should be used to be sure that you really understand all of these. You should ask for any definitions of any medical terms you don't understand, and ask questions about anything you don't understand and what a physician is explaining to you. Don't be afraid that you're taking up too much of the doctor's time. It's your body, and you have a right to understand. You have a right to explanations which enable you to understand all information about your diagnosis, treatment, and prognosis. And this leads to the idea of informed consent. You have a right to receive all information needed to give informed consent. So informed consent is consent when you know all the risks and benefits to the treatment being proposed, so that you understand the information and also they know how to use this information. It applies to any procedure or treatment. The information consists of possible risks and benefits, alternative treatments or procedures with the risks and benefits of those, the probability of success, and then you also want to know how the doctor defines success. You know, if you're having a hip replacement and you're 90 years old, you may have a good hip, but if your knees aren't functioning well, then it's not really of use to you because you're still not able to be mobile. You want to also know the likely results of no treatment and the amount of time needed for recuperation. So recuperation would be until you can get back to your normal daily activities. And then you also might want to know from the doctor any other information that's generally provided to patients in your situation. You also want to receive all information you need to give informed consent not to resuscitate, which is called a DNR. Patient and family might want a DNR if a patient is expected to die from a terminal illness. A doctor signs the order after consulting with the patient and or health proxy. So usually it's the patient or health proxy that requests the DNR, and then the doctor has to sign the order giving that to you. The order instructs the doctor not to provide CPR, intubation, or mechanical ventilation if the heart stops beating or a patient ceases to breathe. You have the right to choose someone to give this consent for you if you are too ill to do so. Now, one thing that people sometimes don't realize is if they call an ambulance, even if you have a DNR, once you call the ambulance, emergency personnel will start to give you CPR or try to otherwise take measures to keep you alive. You have a right to refuse treatment and be told what effect this will have on your health. You might refuse treatment as a choice to improve the quality of your life rather than to extend it. So a cancer patient who finds the treatments are not helping them may refuse to have another form of chemotherapy if they think it's going to make them ill, and prefers to feeling better and maybe not extending their lifespan. You might want to avoid painful treatment. This right applies to people who are legally competent. Legally competent means that you are able to make decisions for yourself. And if there's ever a question about someone's legal competence, a physician will come and evaluate that patient and decide if the person is legally competent. If someone is not competent, then a health proxy or someone you designate to make decisions for you can make those decisions for you. You have a right to refuse to take part in research. You may wish to take part in an innovative experimental treatment if the standard treatment has not been effective for you. However, you should always ask questions before receiving experimental treatment. You want to know what benefits you can receive from participating. You want to know what the risks are to your health or bodily functions from participating. You want to describe the purpose of the research and the future benefits to other people. There's a difference between treatment and research. Treatment is a form of care which involves using procedures and medicines which are known to be safe and effective. The physician's only goal is to treat the patient, and the patient's well-being is at the heart of treatment. Research, on the other hand, involves testing a new innovative treatment for safety and for efficacy, which is effectiveness. The researchers are testing a hypothesis about the effectiveness of the treatment and is for the benefit of future patients. So sometimes the patients involved in the study, the doctors may sometimes not have that patient's interests at the heart of what they're trying to do, and they may want to have those interests at heart, but sometimes being in research blinds you to effects on a patient. Okay, other questions to ask if you choose to be in research would be, what will be done to me if I'm a subject that would not be done to me otherwise? You'd want to know who the principal investigator is, if he or she is being paid by a drug company or other for-profit company to do the research. So if you are in a research project, you might prefer to be in a research project of an academic institution rather than a for-profit institution. You want to know if this is a randomized trial, and you might want to know if you'd be paid for any injuries resulting from participation. And you'd also want to know who will have access to the results and the medical records. So you want to know that your name is not identifiable in the records. You have a right to privacy while in the hospital and confidentiality of all information and records regarding your care. There's a difference between confidentiality and privacy. Confidentiality refers to the necessary sharing of personal information with people who are involved in your medical care, such as your doctors, your nurses, your therapists. And privacy refers to individuals who are not directly involved in your care, who may want access to the private information in your medical records, such as insurance companies or researchers. The right to privacy also includes privacy while in the hospital, so that while you're in the hospital, you have a right to receive only those visitors who you choose to receive. You also have a right to insist on being transferred to another room if someone in your room is making undue noise and disturbing you unreasonably. You have a right to refuse to see social workers or chaplains and others not directly involved in your care, and you can forbid them from seeing your records. And you have a right to have a person of your sex present during any examinations by a physician of the opposite sex. And I know it happens from time to time that people share a room with someone who has lots of visitors and a patient is being disturbed by that person, so it's important to remember that it's your right to have your room changed if that occurs. You have a right to participate in all decisions about your treatment and discharge from the hospital. Hospitals must provide you with a written discharge plan and written description of how you can appeal your discharge. Hospitals also must give you a discharge notice 24 hours before leaving the hospital, including a description of whom to call and how to appeal. The appeal must be made no later than the planned discharge date in order for you to avoid extra charges. Your discharge date is determined only by your health needs, not by the category of your diagnosis or insurance. Hospitals are paid often by something called diagnostically related groups. And for each diagnostically related group, there's a number of days when treatment is covered, but that should not determine your discharge date. Your health is what should determine your discharge date. And hospitals must offer you a safe discharge plan. If there's a question about the safety of your plan, you can appeal the discharge date. An example would be, when I was working at a hospital, there was a patient who was supposed to be discharged home to be cared for by her spouse. And the daughter said this was an unsafe discharge because the spouse had dementia and he couldn't handle caring for his wife at home. So the discharge plan was altered and the person stayed an extra couple of days in the hospital. You have a right to review your medical record without charge. You might want to review your record to better understand your medical condition, to better understand all options available to you, to be able to cooperate with the treatment chosen, to check the accuracy of the family and personal histories, and to be informed in order to give informed consent. You also want to be able to appreciate more fully the state of your health, to be able to prevent a recurrence of a disease, and also to decide whether or not to work with the physician. That might be another reason you might want to review your medical record. Now, you also have a right to receive a copy of the record, but hospitals may charge a reasonable fee in order to get copies, in order to send you copies of the record. On the other hand, the Bill of Rights says you cannot be denied a copy solely because you can't afford to pay. So there's some gray area there. If you are denied a record, you can lodge a complaint with the hospital's representative, a hospital administrator, the risk manager, the ethics person, the ethics compliance officer, or the ethics committee of a hospital. Following discharge, the hospital administrator would be your first contact. You also have a right to receive an itemized bill, an explanation of all charges. You have a right to complain about services and care you are receiving without any fear of reprisal by hospital personnel. And you have a right to authorize family members and other adults who will be given priority to visit you, consistent with your ability to receive visitors. And you also have a right to make known your wishes in regard to anatomical gifts. So the books listed below and articles are the sources I used for this talk. And thank you very much for coming. Wow.